Hello, and welcome to a conversation on the Daily Bern. This is our very first episode. I started this page back in 2015 to support Bernie's campaign and the progressive agenda and candidates through the years, and just starting to jump in and do live interviews and candidate profiles. And, you know, we got an amazing progressive to kick us off, Mr. Hector Oseguera from New Jersey's 8th District, running to unseat what we call a corporate Democrat. How you doing, Hector?
Doing well. Thank you so much for having me, Eric.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time to chat with me about yourself, about your candidacy, about the district, and so forth. I guess the first thing I want to ask is a little bit about your background. I know you've been active in politics for a few years. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So I really got involved in politics back in 2012, volunteering for Elizabeth Warren's first Senate run. I sort of have this track record that I help people's campaigns that really speak to me and make me think that they're worth fighting for, although I'm not always sure that they'll definitely win. But I'm more of an issues person. And so I got on board with Senator Warren back in 2012. She was running against Scott Brown, who people had good feelings about in Massachusetts, and I wasn't 100% sure that she would win. But I thought was a worthwhile campaign to get involved with, and is one that I was very proud to have worked on, and I'm glad that she won. Then in 2016, I got involved with Bernie's campaign as a volunteer. I was going door to door and phone banking, text banking, all that stuff with Bernie. And then finally in 2018, I volunteered for fellow BU alum AOC, who I was very inspired by and thought that she had a message that was absolutely worth running for and talking about. So I was very inspired by her and wanted to get involved in her campaign. So that's sort of my background in politics.
Right on. I want to ask what you learned about grassroots campaigning from her campaign, but how about professionally? I hear you're kind of a professional anti-corruption person. That's a good thing on your resume in this case.
Yeah, so that's really why my signature issue is anti-corruption, is that as a day job, I am an anti-money laundering specialist, which means that I review wire activity and try to uncover illicit behavior going on in our financial system. I've worked on such investigations at prior firms as the Panama Papers, which some of your viewers may know about. There was one in Brazil called Operation Car Wash. And there was one in Estonia called the Russian Laundromat. So I really look for corrupt activity going on in our financial system and would refer that to the Department of the Treasury for law enforcement investigation. And so I think that I have a very credible history when it comes to combating corruption, and think that I have the tools necessary to uncover and combat the corruption that is going on in our own government.
Right on. So suffice it to say, you do not take corporate PAC money.
Absolutely not. No corporate PAC money.
Right. In New Jersey, I guess that area of New Jersey particularly has a bit of a stigma in terms of corruption and kind of an insider machine. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so there's this Democratic club called the Hudson County Democratic Organization, better known as the Machine or the organization in this part of New Jersey, and it's the bastion of corruption. People are flunkies for this machine. They are forced to do political favors for this machine. I could tell you all about the corrupt schemes that they engage in this part of Hudson County. The machine really uses our educational system as their farm system. That's why you'll see that a lot of our politicians come out of the Board of Education system. And that's really because in a lot of these counties, people use the teachers as their foot soldiers. They'll say, well, if you want to move up the ladder, if you want to make tenure, if you want to get a pay raise, you must donate and canvass for your local politician. And if you kiss the ring and pay tribute to these politicians, they will look upon you favorably. They'll let you move up the chain. Maybe you'll get onto a seat on the Board of Education and move up the chain. And maybe one day you'll get to be a machine flunky too.
Right. Yeah. What an aspiration, right? And I heard there's a bit of a real estate component to it too. There's abatements that have been given. Can you talk about that as well?
Yeah, so my opponent is actually called the King of Abatements because he sold the waterfront of the town that was my hometown called West New York, New Jersey. And he gave these 30-year abatements to the developers so that now the people living up on the cliff, which is really working class, poor Hispanic people, are funding this very luxurious waterfront for real estate developers. And, you know, you could just draw your own conclusions, but my opponent gave a 30-year abatement that predominantly benefited one firm called Roseland Developments. Now, if you look at my opponent's FEC filings, his #1 contributor is a company by the name of Roseland Developments. So yeah, I think you can draw the line there.
What an amazing coincidence that is. Wow. Yeah, I also heard that he voted for the USMCA, and yeah. Yeah, let's take a look at the district real quick. I have kind of a profile.
Yeah, beautiful.
So, you know, I like to, because there's such ridiculous gerrymandering, I like to show the district and see, you know, a lot of people don't necessarily know. They want us to be uninformed, right? And that's kind of an ancillary bonus to gerrymandering from their perspective, right?
Yeah.
So I wanted to show the district. So I don't know if you can see this, but it's a little bit like the counties. We have some Bergen, Essex, Hudson, Union.
Yep.
Some of the cities in your district: Fairview, Bellevue, Newark, Bayonne, Hoboken, Harrison, Jersey City, Elizabeth, Union City, Weehawken, and West New York.
One quick correction. It's Belleville, but I understand, and you can see that at the top left corner of the district, and that's the Essex County side of it. I really call my district the Hispanic gerrymander because, in fact, if you look the counties, it starts with Bergen, but only one town in Bergen County is in my district, and that's Fairview, and that's because they have a large Hispanic population, and only one city in Union County is in my district, and that's Elizabeth, which you can see at the bottom left-hand corner of the district, and that's, again, because Elizabeth has a very large Hispanic population. Certain towns like Jersey City, Bayonne, and Newark are literally cut in half between the predominantly Hispanic sections and the predominantly Black sections, with the Hispanic sections falling into my district.
Yeah, so how have what does that equate to in terms of manipulating the votes from the machine side of things, if you will?
Yeah, so this is really how that works, is that my opponent has a very strong base in the Hudson County section. So if you look at the map, that's the right-hand portion of the district. You'll see the strip that just goes down along the water. That's where he's very, very strong. And basically, he expects those sections of the district to have very strong turnout for him, and then he completely ignores the other sections of the district that fall on the left-hand side of the map. His website, in fact, even forgot to mention that part of the district is in Bergen County. He only said Essex, Hudson, and Union because, again, as long as he has Hudson County, he believes that he will always and forever be able to hold on to his seat, and doesn't expect the turnout in Union and Essex County and West Hudson County to be sufficient enough to knock him out of power. So we've been campaigning really hard in those forgotten sections of the district and letting those people know, you know, he's really forgotten about you. Why don't you just forget about him too?
Yeah. And I imagine the Roseland properties you mentioned are on the water here, right?
Absolutely. All the parts right on that waterfront.
Yeah. And the sections you're mentioning are they're more densely populated, I imagine.
Yep.
You know, particularly now. Maybe can you talk about some of the issues that are hitting them harder now in terms of eviction, rent? You know, we have the pandemic going on.
Absolutely. So two main issues. So first, there's definitely an affordable housing crisis that's going on, again, because of these high-end developers. One of those developers is a one Mr. Jared Kushner, which you might have heard of, who, again, came to Jersey City, bought up this high-rise, and is really known as a slumlord in the district. And the other issue I would say is healthcare, because we have double the national uninsured rate in this district. And of course, my opponent will not sign on to any sort of Medicare for all legislation. There's a bill in the House by Pramila Jayapal, which I'm a supporter of, and my opponent is not. And so he is not a fighter for Medicare for all. He takes a lot of money from the healthcare insurance companies and from the pharmaceutical industries, which are very powerful lobbies here in New Jersey. And so, again, you can draw your own conclusions as to why he might not be a strong fighter for a Medicare for all system. And those are the real big issues. So affordable housing, healthcare, and I would say that the corruption issue, because I tie every conversation back to the corruption issue. And I say that if you're wondering why a problem doesn't get fixed, it's actually because there's a select group of people who like things the way that they are and have a vested interest in things not changing much at all. And so if you're curious as to why things are not getting fixed, despite the fact that everybody knows that they're wrong, it's because to some people, they're not wrong. And those are the people who are funding your local politician.
Right. Yeah, they're essentially paid not to fix it.
Exactly.
Right? They're,
exactly.
I always use the analogy, they're the Washington Generals to the Harlem Globetrotters. They may get the same paycheck from the same owners, but they're out there to, score a few baskets, but ultimately lose the game. Right.
Indeed. And I liken it a lot to like WWF. Like they are paid to go out there and hammer Donald Trump and say, oh, he's such a terrible guy. He's such a racist, this, that, and the third. And then they go behind closed doors and they vote for his war budgets. And then they vote for his corporate welfare. And it's just for the people that they say these things. But behind closed doors, they're all on the same side.
Yeah. What do you think about this? Kind of a hot topic of the day. What do you think about a lot of these like performative displays of wokeness or whatever, right? So, we can write Black Lives Matter on a city block, but not, get rid of qualified immunity. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We can get rid of the Aunt Jemima bottle and the Washington Redskins, and all those things are great, right? Absolutely progress, but they're barely substantive. What are your thoughts on that, or what do you hear from your constituents about that?
Yeah. And I think that that's a great topic because there's been a lot of solidarity, especially in my district, between the Hispanic and the Black community when it comes to issues like Black Lives Matter. My opponent has now taken to calling himself a progressive and says that he's more progressive than I am. Meanwhile, he obviously takes a lot of corporate PAC money, votes for Trump's war budgets, has never met a foreign intervention he didn't like. And so I think that what is happening is that the politicians notice that there's a lot of capital to this term progressive and are willing to do just enough to be seen as progressive without actually having to do the hard work of fighting for these progressive values and fighting for the people. So yeah, I mean, there is a lot of that, what you would call a public display of wokeness to pretend as if you care about these issues. My opponent was not showing up at any rallies until I got a couple of headlines talking about how I was at a lot of the early marches about George Floyd. My opponent has never been a fighter on the issue of social justice, but now all of a sudden wants to highlight all of the great social justice issues that he's a strong champion on. So I would say this, you have to, you can't judge somebody by what they do when the cameras are looking. You should judge people by what they do when the cameras are off. And if your local politician was never talking about these issues before it hit the headlines, you shouldn't trust them to when they talk about it now, because they're just trying to appease the general public and trying to be seen as being on the right side of history. You know where their heart truly is when you inspect what they were doing, during Trayvon Martin, during Eric Gardner, which themselves generated tons of headlines, but didn't cause the sort of uproar that the George Floyd and Breonna Taylor incidents did. So you have to judge these people by what they've been doing for a long time. That's why a lot of people like Bernie Sanders, because they were saying that, he's been on the same issues for a long time. He didn't just start talking about these issues now that they are hitting the headlines. So you should judge people based on what they were doing 10, 20 years ago, not what they do now that the cameras are looking.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Someone once said he was an activist before he was a politician, right?
Yeah.
And that says everything. Let's talk about your platform. You threw out a few of the things: Medicare for all, Green New Deal. So I just kind of pulled a few from your website, and that's always a thing. You can tell by, like you kind of said, right? You can tell by a candidate what they stand for when you go to the website, if they have the issues delineated, if they have stern language, if they say explicitly Medicare for all versus, everyone deserves quality
Public option.
Right. So let's talk about these a little bit. I just pulled 4.
Yeah.
Feel free to add any that you think is more of a priority, but affordable housing.
Yeah. I'm big on, the simple fact of the matter is that our housing laws haven't been updated in quite some time. So they're all judged on, you get subsidies based on how much you make relative to the average median income. If you actually look at what the average median income is in a lot of these places, it's ridiculous to most of the people that live there. And I've gone to a lot of housing seminars talking about how the average median income doesn't really mean anything to most working class people in the district. So we really have to update our metrics, chain a lot of these metrics to the CPI so that we're not constantly having to readjust these issues. And obviously, my big thing is the abatements, because a lot of luxury developers are coming into my district and are really making the district unaffordable because they're eating up all the housing stock and not creating any units of affordable housing that the people who live here can afford. So a lot of my friends and family have been pushed out west, pushed out of the communities that they grew up in, or have just given up completely and moved to Florida or down south where it's a lot cheaper because they just simply can't afford to live here anymore.
Yeah. Medicare for All, you already mentioned you support Pramila Jayapal's bill, which is fantastic. Green New Deal, you're a bit of a younger candidate than your opponent. Can you talk about the critical nature of the Green New Deal looking forward?
Yeah, so there was a study done by the Rhodium Group, which says that this district specifically would be the hardest hit by costs by rising sea levels. And so we have a lot of work to do when it comes to preparing for the future, when it comes to what climate change is going to do to this district specifically. We were hit by Hurricane Sandy very hard, and there are people that to this very day are still waiting for the relief. It's been almost a decade now since Hurricane Sandy, and the government really hasn't gotten its act together when it comes to that. So, I've been endorsed by quite a few local chapters of the Sunrise Movement here in New Jersey. I've been endorsed by all the young progressive climate change groups because they recognize that I will be on the right side of history, and that I'm not just using slogans to pretend as if I'm a fighter for these issues and will just turn around and take money from ExxonMobil like my opponent does. And also, this is not an issue that gets talked about very often, but I definitely put into the Green New Deal environmental issues is that there is lead in the water of Newark, New Jersey. This is not an issue that most people want to talk about, mostly because like Flint, Michigan, Newark, New Jersey is a mostly Black and brown community, but they have lead in their water, and the politicians have allowed something that we don't expect to happen in this country to be done to a lot of our people simply because they're Black and brown and they don't see them as, part of their base. And that sort of ties into the whole gerrymandering thing and how my opponent only wants to maintain his base of control in one part of the district and is very happy to ignore another section of the district. So in Essex County, where Newark is, there is lead in the water, and I'm running with a couple of other activists from what is called the Newark Water Coalition to really stand up on this issue and say that we will bring billions of dollars in federal funding to update our water infrastructure across the state of New Jersey and across the country, because if we're suffering from it, we know that there are other places in the country that are suffering from it, and we just don't know about it yet.
Excellent. Yeah, Rashida Tlaib just passed that bill, I guess, yesterday as we're recording this. That's great. So when you talk about, there is, like we mentioned earlier, there's a bit of, they rig the board and they keep, those densely populated areas uninformed. So when you're reaching out to them and you're explaining this very real thing, like these are your pipes, this is lead, this is your water, what's the reaction?
Well, people are honestly very, very receptive to my message, specifically because my opponent has been there for a very long time and people recognize that things have not gotten better in that time period. So I'll just ask them, do you think things have gotten better in the last 14 years? Are you doing better? It's that old question. Are you better off than you were, not 4 years ago, but 14 years ago in my case? And asking the people of the district, have things improved around here in the last 14 years? If you are a political flunky, if you're part of the machine, you'll say, Albio has been great on all these issues. He's such a great guy, most progressive person in Congress, great Democrat, whatever. If you ask the everyday working class person of the district, they will say absolutely not. It's become more expensive to live here. We don't see our prospects getting any better. We actually see them getting a lot worse, and we're concerned about the future of our children. I've gotten quite a few people who are a little bit on the more conservative side of the spectrum say to me, you know what, Hector, I'm not really with you on Medicare for All and a Green New Deal. I'm not really that as progressive, But if you promise to fight for the future of my children, you have my vote.
Right on. Yeah, I mean, without that, there's almost nothing else in the future, right? That is, you know, and to your opponent, I'm assuming he did not sign on to Markey and AOC, the Green New Deal, right? So,
Absolutely not.
yeah.
He won't even say the words Green New Deal until Nancy Pelosi gives him permission to.
Yikes. Yeah, and at this point, delaying is no different than denying, right? So,
Indeed.
yeah. Can you talk about just the challenges of the campaign? So, before we jumped on live, this is a heavily mail-in ballot race because of the pandemic. Can you talk about how you've been doing outreach and what's the process of voting?
Yeah, so outreach has been a little difficult because we're stuck to only digital. We can't go door to door. Most people are not going to open the door to a random stranger in the middle of a pandemic. And so we've really had to be strong on social media, and that's a gift and a curse, right? So it's definitely a gift because this is a younger, scrappier campaign. So we're a lot stronger on social media than my opponent is. You can tell that by the fact that he's had to have 2 AstroTurf accounts created, one of which tweeted his name incorrectly. So he's very, very bad on social media. And it's very easy to tell that we have a much stronger presence on social media than my opponent does, right? Unfortunately, most of the older voters are not on social media, and they're the heavy voting base. And so I almost am afraid, not afraid, but I do worry that there are people in the district who may not have heard about me as strong as we may have been on social media. So what we're doing to combat that is that we're basically using up all the literature that we had bought early in the campaign and leaving those on people's windshields, at people's doors, so at least to get our name recognition up there. And then we've had a very strong poster team that goes out across the district and will staple our posters onto the light fixtures and onto the light poles across the district so that people can see my face, they can see my name, and they can really, if they're interested, can start to look around and say, maybe I want to find out more about this kid. And from there, from seeing my face out in the physical world, we'll then go home and say, maybe I'll put his name into Google and see what comes up. And, like I said, my digital presence is a lot stronger than my opponent's. So much more that I actually purchased my opponent's domain name. If you were to go to albiosires.com, you'll end up at my donation page.
Great. All's fair, right? And there was a tweet yesterday. You mentioned AstroTurf accounts. That basically means like a consultant. Yeah, it doesn't have a lot of skin in the game. Maybe they're even hired by the party, right, rather than the candidate directly. There was a tweet yesterday where they completely misspelled his name, which
yeah. And there's another one that was basically created 2 weeks ago. In their Twitter bio says not associated with my opponent's campaign, and all they do is retweet his tweets and then tweet really bad things at me. So it's just hilarious. Yeah. A more dedicated 12-year-old could make a more convincing AstroTurf page.
Well, 12-year-olds these days are pretty advanced. Let's be fair.
Indeed.
So as far as challenging an incumbent, we're kind of touching on a few things. Have there been any actual obstacles other than the ones we've mentioned that they've put in your way? Like, it's not an easy, it's an uphill battle, right?
It absolutely is an uphill battle, but I would say that we're really taking it to them. The machine is very scared. They are oozing fear every single day. And that, honestly, I think ends up looking stronger for me because a lot of the people in this district, the machine has a dedicated pool of voters, but everybody outside of that pool of voters doesn't really associate the machine with good things. And so they'll say, wow, this kid really has them scared. I wonder what he's up to. And so I think that the more sort of very comfortable endorsements they get from machine flunkies, the more people are like, what is this kid up to that they have to drag all these people out of the basement to endorse this incumbent who has never had to have anybody endorse him in 14 years?
Right. Interesting. Can you talk about, I guess there was something with the positioning literally on the ballot.
Oh, man, yeah. I wish I could talk more about that. I wish I still had my ballot here so I could show you. So the way that New Jersey ballots are made, it's called the county line. And literally candidates are stacked above one another from president down to Senate, down to House, down to what are called freeholders, which is part of the county government, right? And the machine was saying, this is back when Bernie was really surging, and they were afraid that somebody like myself would get on the line with Bernie and that we would pose a very strong challenge to the line. I'm actually going to tweet about this later on today, so I'm giving you the preview, but they said that they would take the presidential candidates off of the line. And then they said that both Bernie and Biden had agreed to this agreement, right? After they forced the Bernie campaign to not bracket with progressives like myself, they went behind everybody's back and bracketed with Joe Biden. So they are on a line with Joe Biden, which they need because it gives the perception that they are sort of the official Democratic line. And so we'll be calling and text banking people, and they will say, yeah, I voted straight Democrat in this race. And not realize that, or not know that we're in a primary and everybody on your ballot is a Democrat. And so the machine benefits tremendously from what we call the county line, because it gives this false impression that some people are the real Democrats on the ballot and other people are just like somebody else or not Democrats. And so, yeah, the county line, I could go on for hours about this because there's a lot of research that has gone into the strength and how much of an electoral advantage goes into having the county line. But what I will say is that there's a position that's most advantageous, and it's column A. It's the first column. It goes A to Z. You see what I'm saying? So, and alphabetically, A is the first one that voters see, and so traditionally the machine always gets line A. By a stroke of luck, or hard work, whatever you want to call it, this year the progressives were able to get line A. So we do have an advantage on the ballot, but not the full advantage of, having a presidential candidate on top of our line, which really would have helped us. And we know that the machine did this because they were afraid of the electoral challenge that they might get from people like me.
Yeah. There's also probably a lot of activists that were working on the Bernie campaign that were also working on House races and stuff. But when he suspended his campaign, we got to put our energy somewhere. So you probably saw an influx of, donors or, volunteers or whatnot.
Yeah, the day that Bernie dropped out, there was a lot of sadness from the progressive movement. But that day, we did see a surge in both donations and volunteer requests because people said, you know what, I don't have time to be upset about what happened. I really want to make sure that other progressives get across the line.
Yeah. So it is a mail-in ballot. The actual election day is July 7th. Can you talk about the mechanics of anybody in your district that's hearing this that needs to vote, wants to vote? How do they do it?
Yeah, so if you have your ballot already in your home, please fill it out and put it in the mailbox by July 7th. There are certain secure locations where you can drop it off all across the district, which are specifically for the mail-in ballots. And I would say that I strongly encourage everybody to vote by mail if they have the opportunity. If they haven't gotten their ballot in the mail, please call your county clerk as soon as possible. Some county clerks are allowing people to pick up their ballot directly at the county clerk's office. Because if you were to go physically, there will only be half of the ballot locations open, and then you will be casting a provisional ballot, and there's some confusion as to what they will do with those provisional ballots. And so I am obviously, if you don't have any other option, go in and vote in person provisionally. But if you do have the option, if you are able to get to the county clerks, or if you have your ballot sitting at home and you haven't dusted it off in a couple weeks, please make sure that you fill it out and put it in the mailbox by July 7th, this upcoming Tuesday. There are a couple steps you have to take. So number one, fill in the bubble like you were taking the SAT test or like a Scantron test. Don't check the bubble. Make sure you fill it out completely. You will put that ballot in a certification envelope, which you then have to sign on the back. You put that certification envelope in the return envelope and make sure that you put that in the mail after you seal it. There's a bearer on the back of the envelope, which you don't have to fill out, but just make sure that you fill it out completely and put it in the mail. If you make any sort of error, there's a perforated section that people are told not to tear off. If you do tear it off, the county clerks are allowing people to scotch tape it back together and mail that in. If you receive your ballot and it's torn in half, I had a voter reach out and say, I got my ballot and it was literally cut in half. You are again allowed to scotch tape it back together and the county clerk will accept that. So If there's any sort of physical defect on the ballot, do not be afraid of, taping it back together and sending it that way. We want everybody to exercise their right to vote. And in fact, the machine did not want a vote by mail primary. They wanted every single person to show up at the ballot box in the middle of a pandemic and vote in person, which I think is unconscionable. And the progressives, pushed Governor Murphy very hard on a vote by mail primary, and he actually did take our recommendation. So we really appreciate that. And, we wanted to make sure that every single person was able to cast their vote in this primary.
Right on. Yeah, good information. Before I let you go, is there anybody else either on your ballot or in other House races in New Jersey that you want to do a little campaigning or make mention or plug?
Yeah, so there's a huge progressive movement all across the state of New Jersey, going down to Arati Krybik in District 5, Zena Spazakis in District 9. There are some candidates in District 10, which is the one right next to mine. And there's also Russ Sorenzi-Oni in the 6th District. All of these are strong progressives, and they're fighting for Bernie's agenda. I myself am running with a bunch of freeholder candidates in every single county that I'm running in. So in Hudson County, I have a slate of freeholder candidates running with me. The same thing in Union, in Bergen, and in Essex County. We're all running together because this is a full-out assault on political corruption and on the political machine. This election, I say this a lot, this is not about me. This is about you. This is about the people of the district who are sick of being poorly represented and want change.
Yeah, that's great. And that's the core difference between someone that would work for a machine and someone that's an advocate, an activist like you are, right? You're not running to, get a sweetheart deal, to get a lobbyist gig. I'm not trying to put that in but it shows, right? There is a difference in candidates. So, thank you for highlighting those, and thank you for stepping up and running. If we had, we need 435 more of you.
Thank you.
Let's get you into the House. So if you're watching this, please vote for Hector, and support him. On the other side of the race, however it turns out, hopefully we'll be celebrating. So anything else you want to make mention of before we sign off? I thank you for taking the time to chat with me.
No, thank you so much for having me on. Anybody who's interested can go to my website. It's my last name, Oseguera2020.com. My handle is the same thing, Oseguera2020 on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Anybody who's interested and would like to get involved, we need all the help we can get. We're planning to send out 500,000 text messages before the end of Election Day on Tuesday. So we're heavily phone banking and text banking every single day. We need all the help we can get. This is a people-powered campaign. In fact, this is not a machine-powered campaign. My opponent said something hilarious to NPR this morning, that if I had the machine, I would be very happy about it. That is absolutely false. I don't want anything to do with that corrupt machine, and I would not take their help if they got on their knees and begged for me to take it. So no, this is not about having a political establishment at my back. This is about having the people of the district at my back. And I want everybody to know that I will never forget where I came from. I will never forget the people who supported me in this campaign. And I will never forget the beautiful people of the 8th District who know that they need better and they deserve better.
Perfect. Fire. That's what we want. We want fire. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, sir. Good luck on the 7th.
Thank you so much, Eric. I appreciate it.
Thank you.